I think we're almost ready to start. Okay, then let us get going. Let me welcome you all online. It's really good to have you join us for this prestigious event. So welcome. It is an absolute privilege to host this launch event. And like you, I'm looking forward to hearing this evening's conversation between Amanda Khozi Mukwashi and Dr. Rowan Williams. My name is Dion Graves Andy, and I often describe myself as somebody who's fueled by love and motivated by faith. I'm a testimony to the pursuit of peace and justice, and in my daytime job at Christian Aid, that's what I seek to do. But I've also been a resident columnist for Keep the Faith magazine for many years, and so I'm particularly delighted to host this event because I resonate with the story, a story of displacement and dislocation. But I love that it walks us through a journey of identity, faith and hope. This evening, we will be hearing from the publishers. We'll also hear a live reading from the book itself. So the chat box is open, so do give us some thumbs up when you hear what you like. And then we'll move into tonight's feature piece, the actual conversation itself. Afterwards, we'll have some opportunity to put a few questions to Amanda, and I'll say a bit more about that later on. So before I hand you over to the publishers to say something, I want to leave with you three specific things. Please, I'm just going to repeat this message. Ensure that your mics are on mute. I'm encouraging you to tweet throughout this session. So if you're able to, if you see the slide, please tweet using the hashtag. So that's either hashtag BWAYRF. So for the book, or hashtag really from launch. So please do engage with this evening's conversation by commenting in the chat box. And so at this point, I'm going to hand you over to all the publishers, and they're going to say a few words.
Thank you, Dion. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this webinar tonight. I'm Alexandra MacDonald, and I'm the Commercial Director here at SPCK. I'm going to make some opening remarks about the book and the author in lieu of Elizabeth Neep, who was Amanda's commissioning editor, and Elizabeth looked after the publishing process of the book for SPCK. I think it's fair to say that when Elizabeth first spoke to Amanda about a book that she'd been told she'd written, neither editor nor author knew what to expect. Elizabeth tells me that Amanda very humbly mentioned that it was her first attempt at book writing, and she didn't actually know whether it would be of any interest to anyone other than her family. So, dear reader, obviously, it was. And Elizabeth, in that first phone call they had together, explained in intricate detail how painstakingly slow the book publishing process could be. And yet, if we could pick two words to describe this book's journey, it would be spark and speed. Firstly, the spark was in Amanda's work. Both the captivating and challenging story of stories Amanda shares in the book, but also its ability to ignite much needed conversation in a way that contributes positively and proudly to the ongoing discussions of race, culture, humanhood, and hope. And secondly, speed. Miraculously, every turn in this publishing journey for this book, from the contracting, the editing, the cover design, the production, the marketing, the publicity, the sales, everything has seemed to have the breath of God behind it. There has been a shared sense that this book is needed for such a time as this. Any authors in the aspiring authors in the audience, please note this is not normal for a book. Oh, and did I mention that all of this happened during lockdown? Yet, for all of its spark and all of its speed, the book's content and Amanda's consummate authority to write it is something she has been building over a lifetime. We are so proud to be publishing this book and cannot thank Amanda, Rowan Williams, Chinny MacDonald, and the whole team at Christian Aid enough for walking with us on this publishing journey. So now, without any further ado, I will hand over to Mbozi Haimbe, a long-time friend of Amanda's, originally from Zambia, to read a piece from But Where Are You Really From by Amanda Khozi Mukwashi. Mbozi, over to you.
Thanks, Alexandra. I'm reading from chapter 4, and here it goes. When my grandparents first arrived in northern Rhodesia, they settled in the central province in a place called Khozi, now called Lusaka West. Back then, places were known by the name of the white farmers who owned them. I place owned in inverted commas because of the significance of the dispossession of the land by those who colonized Africa. This became the first but most critical way to take away the power of the people. Later in life, I would write a paper on the issue of land and sovereignty while studying at Warwick University. The fact that much land was not fairly acquired and that the matter has never been adequately settled remains a sore point that perpetuates injustice to this day. In many countries, the attitude has been to let bygones be bygones, but that in no way signifies a lack of consciousness of the issue. Like a small snake, such consciousness is burrowed deep inside the social fabric of society, and every so often, when things break down, it rears its head and spits venom into the air, infecting and affecting everyone within reach, who, in turn, responds with anger and outrage at the injustice of it all. Khozi was so named because the farm belonged to a white farmer called Mr. James. The agreement was that Sekuru and others would work the land for the landowner, and in turn they were given small patches of land on which to grow their own crops. They would harvest the owner's land first, after which Mr. James would invite them to glean the land and pick up any leftovers. Mr. James would also collect about 1/10 of the personal yield of the workers. Away from their native country and working for white farmers, they never forgot the reasons for their migrating. They kept focused on their dreams to farm their own pieces of land and to be independent. They banded together as families and communities and worked hard. They saved and they communicated well to ensure that knowledge of opportunities was shared. They also learned other ways of farming from the white farmers, and I believe the white farmers learned from them too. And when they left Khozi, they were able to find more permanent communities, they were able to find more permanent host communities, grow roots, and grow their own wealth. Sekuru and Mbuya went on to settle in a place called Mwalilanda, just after a landless corner of Kabwe Road, about 100 kilometers north as you come from Lusaka in Zambia. This was the land of the Lenjes, a people in the central province of Zambia on the way to the Copperbelt province. The local headman was called Bamwalilanda. Each morning, Bamwalilanda would come to Mbuya's kitchen from his house, and he would sit and have breakfast. Sekuru and Mbuya were nicknamed Mupabonse because they gave to everyone. They would take food to the widows and orphans and would always welcome those who did not have much. The Shona migrants grew in strength and made an impact on the land and on the people that they found, working together as families and helping one another during planting and harvesting. They made a list of all the fields from the different families that needed planting or harvesting. Then they made a schedule detailing the days and the times at which they would all go to work on a specific field. After harvesting, they would celebrate together. They were distinct from the indigenous people of their adopted country in many ways, as were the homesteads. Shona homes were big rotundas, but also rectangular and square. The roofs were made of dry grass or reeds neatly knitted together to form thatch in a style known as matiki, and then lifted up and placed on top of the clay walls. The walls themselves would be painted with drawings of animals, plants, and at times geometric designs. The floors would be made with clay and sand. I remember as a child being asked to help out with protecting the floor from cracks and dust. We used cow dung to cover the floor, and once it was dry, we took flat stones and shined the floor. This sealed the small cracks in the floor and ensured that it was smooth and without dust from the mud floor. We all played a valuable part in the home and learned by observing and practicing what we were taught. Beyond the homestead, we also helped out in the fields. My grandfather would point out trees and explain their nature and their importance. Some were used for medicinal purposes, but all were worth looking after. My mother shared with me a story that Sakura told her one day when they were walking back to the village after visiting some relatives. She was just a young girl, but it is a story that has become increasingly important to me throughout my life, and I have embraced it as my own. It had been raining heavily as they walked. The place was still quiet. The storm had shaken some of the branches from the trees, which were beginning to drop. When they did, a large cracking sound filled the air and my mother was scared. "Don't be afraid," Sakura would say. "The trees are talking about you. They are wondering what your name is." One tree says to the other, "She is called Juliet." The other tree says, "No." The first tree says, "I will call her name and you will see that she will jump." And so, Sakura would go on, "Wherever you go, you must always remember that the trees and the earth know who you are. So, if you forget who you are, just remember what I have told you and you will be fine." Thank you.
I hope that that completely, your appetite was whetted by that. It is a compelling read, it really is. And so we turn to the feature part of tonight's conversation. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Williams, Rowan, who's currently the Master of Magdalene College in Cambridge. Many of you will know him as the former Archbishop of Canterbury. He's also a well-established theologian, an activist and a poet. And Amanda Khozi Mukwashi. She is Christian Aid's CEO, but rather than give you a long list of her achievements, and now she adds publisher to that, or book writer, wanted me to introduce her as a daughter of Africa. So as this lioness shares her own story, allow me to hand over to Rowan. Over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dion. And let me begin by saying what a great honour it is to be invited to take part in this conversation this evening, as indeed it's an honour to work with Amanda in Christian Aid. I've been chair of the trustees of Christian Aid now for a bit over 7 years, and in that time we've faced a great many crises and challenges together. But I think the galvanic vision and energy of Amanda's time as CEO has been very special to all those who've been involved in the work of Christian Aid. And we owe her a huge debt for the commitment, the intelligence, the integrity she's brought to that. And anybody picking up this book, I think, will understand what quality of person it is that we're dealing with here. But that's enough embarrassing, Amanda. I'll start asking some more specific questions. And of course, we've already been told, Amanda, that this is your first venture in serious writing. Is that right? And could you tell us just how difficult you found it?
Thank you, Rowan. I didn't realize it was going to be quite emotional just listening to you introduce me and Mbozi read the book. So I'm just taking a moment to compose myself. Yes, this is my first professional book. I never thought I would be here. I have spent time, every time I'm frustrated or I feel very happy, I do a little bit of doodling, I write matterings, and I've got so many different notebooks over the past 15 years or so, each with an unfinished story. So this was the first time I put something in writing formally. And yeah.
And why now? Why the pressure to get something distilled at this particular point, do you think?
I think it was the coming together of of a number of things. I think one, I started having conversations with my sister about the history of our people, the history of migration, and that it was interesting that I too had migrated the same way that my grandparents had. And I think my grandmother died in 2016, and it just felt like a moment when those that had the knowledge of what had happened were all going. She was almost the last of her age group. And the second thing, I think, was my experience over the last 20 years. I've lived in Europe for the last 20 years of my career. And always, I think, having to see myself or realize that others see this migration as a Black person, with Black being the operative word when they see me. I think the two bits sort of came together. And I thought, so what started off as a documentation of my own history, inevitably came together with my experience of my journey in Europe. And that journey is so connected to the color of my skin. And so I thought I would tell my story, reclaim the meaning of what Black is, redefine it for myself, and hope that there would be others there that would understand that Black is beautiful, it's confident, it's dignity, it's respect, it's love, it's human.
One of the things that strikes me most in the book is how many different kinds of boundaries you've crossed in your life, not only between continents, but between parts of the same continent also. And it's almost as if from the very beginning that migrant experience has been deeply etched in your life. One of the bits of work that some of us have been involved in here in Cambridge in the last year or so has been a couple of projects on the migrant experience and what we're calling migrant knowledge, what it is that migrants know and other people don't. And I'd love to hear you think aloud a bit about that, because of your experience, as I say, being a migrant, even within Africa, within cultures and countries in Africa, as well as between continents. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think that I come from a country of what I would call many nations.
Yeah.
So when you look at Zambia, you don't have just one people or one ethnic group. You have the makings of many peoples and many nations. And I think during the First Republic, that is the Kenneth Kaunda time period, there was an encouragement for us to be considered, to look at ourselves as one nation, one people. And it was a slogan that we all talked about and we laughed about. And I think when we then transitioned into a multi-party democracy, we did away with that. And I think that it's a loss. Because actually, when you look at Zambia as a nation, we have intermarried among different peoples, and what that says to me, as I have travelled from the African continent, I've come to the UK, I've lived in Germany, I've travelled around the world. What it says to me is that the more I meet other people, is that there's a universal truth for me, that actually what we share is so much more and much stronger than what separates us. And so when you ask me about migrant knowledge, I think that every step that you take it feels that you pick up new knowledge, you pick up new pieces, and that's what I've done. And I think those that are more successful, not in terms of prosperity, but in terms of maturity, in terms of humanity and Ubuntu, are those that are willing to learn and to value knowledge that's coming from a different place than they are. And I think that's probably what I would say in terms of that reflection around migrants. Because I don't know what you think, Rowan, but surely a lot of us, including in this country, in the United Kingdom, in England, quite a lot, when they go back generations, they're migrants, you know. So, yeah.
Yes, and this is the odd thing, isn't it? That the history of Europe is a history of mass migration.
Yeah.
And has been since as far back as we can go in history. It's a very strange picture of the world, isn't it, that supposes that everyone is, as it were, dropped down into a little compound. Peoples move and peoples learn. And I really warmed to what you said about the learning that goes on and how the Ubuntu, the common humanity, is such an important part of, especially Desmond Tutu's philosophy, how that's not just a static thing, it's a mobile, interactive thing. And the justice that we look for is a justice that involves a real attention to the difference as well as the sameness. Because if people are different, then we have something to learn from them.
Yes.
That seems to me a profound bit of good news for us. And we forget it at our peril, because to represent the migrant as dangerous is effectively to say, I have nothing to learn except how to protect myself. It isn't a terribly life-giving bit of learning, is it?
Yes, and I think that we see it. We see it. Sometimes I wonder, you know, is it that we're driven by fear? Is it power? Is it self-preservation? You know, but certainly what you find is that the current system that we have in the world, whether you look at the economics or whether you look at the politics or social, is built around the principle of exclusion or excluding rather than including. So everything is about putting you in a different box, in a different quadrant from where I'm sitting, and protecting what I see as my space or my privilege, whichever that is. So one would almost argue that perhaps it's time we stopped building our world and our systems around the axis of excluding, but tried to build it around the axis of including, and see how that might look like.
One of the things that triggers in my mind is the difference between being aware of your roots and defending your territory. And we often confuse those things, as if we could only be somehow faithful to our roots by this passionate defense of the territory we own and control. And it does seem to me that it's possible to be really deeply in touch with your roots and to value where you come from in a positive way, and say, well, that's the soil on which I grow. It's not the possession that I own.
Yes, and I think it will also be interesting to hear from you your own experience, Rowan, because you're from Wales.
I am.
Right. And for me, I think rather than defend my territory, that, you know, I'm from Zambia, I'm a Ngoni woman, and therefore I'm going to defend it. I think what I found is I just want to tell the story. Because I think there's room for me to tell the story of me as a Ngoni woman, me as a Black woman, me as a woman of faith, and you as a Welshman. You know, I think there's enough space for us to tell all those stories. In fact, I would probably go as far as saying, until that it is a mature civilization that is comfortable with telling all the different stories.
Yes.
And I haven't seen that mature civilization as yet, you know.
No, I resonate very much with that. And I remember the experience of trying to explain to people in England when I first started living in England what it was like to grow up in a bilingual environment. Quite simply, being used to hearing more than one language. And although I wasn't brought up primarily in the medium of Welsh, Welsh was spoken all around me through my childhood. And I think it's one of the things that stuck with me, just the sense that, you know, there's always another way of saying things. And that's a really positive and enriching fact in your experience. And if you don't have that basic awareness that there's more than one way of seeing, it's not relativism, it's not dissolving the idea of truth.
Yeah.
Just to say that there really are a rich profusion of ways of seeing and sensing the world, and nobody can see it all at once. So it's very good that we have lots of different perspectives.
Yes, but I think unfortunately we have, and I think I talk about this in my book, and I think you actually mention it in your foreword, that we've been sold a few untruths, but significant ones. And I think the most significant untruth is that there's only one source of truth, right? From a human perspective. So you find that we've believed the lie that women are second-class citizens. We've believed the lie that Black people are inferior. We've believed the lie that Africans somehow deserve, they're a lower product. And I think that in trying to tell and value other people's stories, right, it means that we have to acknowledge and accept that those were untruths, they were lies, right? And they were lies that were meant to keep power among the few, right? And I think there's an interaction there, an interaction between power and fear that I haven't explored fully, but would be interesting to explore. That what might appear to be power is actually a deep sense of fear and lack of appreciation of your own humanity, one's own humanity in relation to others. So I think it's been quite an interesting thought there. But the power of being able to tell this story, and for young people, especially in our schools, in our universities, to have different stories to look at and then create a picture of the world that is based on those different stories, rather than to think that the world is only from one particular standpoint. And I think that's where we've lost it, and that's where we need to change. I think we need to change.
I'm very glad you've raised that question of power, because it seems to me that it's absolutely central in all our thinking about this. And the analysis you've just offered is a very persuasive one, that people who are not at ease in their own identity will very often be that much more nervous about anything that challenges or qualifies it. And so they'll go out to prevent that challenge, which means exercising power. And that's quite a significant part of the history of colonialism, which we're still manifestly dealing with in all sorts of ways. But you mentioned a moment ago the importance of speaking as you do as a person of faith.
Yes.
And you spoke also about speaking as a woman, speaking as an African woman, speaking as a person of faith. Obviously, you as a Christian don't regard the Christian faith as something which is disempowering for you. But it has been for quite a lot of other people in your position, women, African women. And I wonder if you can think a bit about why the Christian church in its history has been so clumsy and so cruel sometimes in its handling of power, when at the heart of its own story is an image of the giving away of power. How did we get into this rather ridiculous position?
That's a tough question.
No, I wrestle with it often.
coming from you, I think it's you probably have more answers than me, to be fair. However, I think I differentiate for myself faith from religious institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And I do so because I think that when I read my Bible, when I read my the Word of God, I see faith as a faith in God. I see faith as God's expression through His creation, and that's why I talk about the trees, because in creating us as human beings in His image and equal. Right, God was manifesting His love for the world, and I see faith as love when I think about the sacrifice that was done. I see faith as compassion. I see I see faith as the glue, for lack of a better word, that joins us to each other, that allows us to be compassionate with each other, and that allows us to dignify one another in our actions. I think in terms of religious institutions, I think that the minute you institutionalize the way I think faith institutions came about, then at the heart of those institutions is power. And to quote a cliche, power corrupts, and the church has not been exempt or immune, rather, to that type of corruption of power. And we see it in history. We see the legitimization of the brutalization of Africans by the church. We see the church in its investments and benefiting from all sorts of fossil fuels, part of the climate change conversation, for example. And that's because it's an institution. And I think that it's not only the Christian religious institutions that have got that problem. I think all faiths, as long as they're set up as big institutions, then they start to revolve around power. And once they start to revolve around power, then they don't operate as God would have them operate. They operate as human beings with massive failings operate, thinking about their self-preservation. I think maybe just as a thought, I think I'm not saying that the church has not done some good things, right? But what I'm saying, what comes to mind is when Jesus Christ goes into the temple and he's angry and he says, "You have turned my Father's house into a marketplace." I think that what we've done is we've taken faith, we've taken the word of God and turned it into a product to be traded in the marketplace. And I think that it's time for us to just take a rain check on that. I don't know if that sort of answers your question, but I would be interested to hear what you think.
Well, it's a very powerful answer, I think, and I have a lot of sympathy with it. And I'm particularly struck by what you say about faith as, if you like, the ground of compassion. Because what I hear is that you're saying faith has something to do with a fundamental trust in the solidarity of human beings in the presence of God, their creator and redeemer. And if you have that sense of basic solidarity, then you can't just sit complacently with unjust patterns of power, because you can't have a real solidarity that involves owners and slaves at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And I think making that connection and really underlining that connection between faith and genuine compassion is crucial here, because there's quite a difference, isn't there, between compassion and pity. Pity is the sort of top-down. Compassion is the sense of sharing an issue knowing that also you need to be receiving as well as giving.
Mm-hmm.
And well, we've both of us said this on behalf of Christian Aid lots of times, but it is part of the Christian Aid DNA that we try very hard not to offer people top-down solutions, but to say, well, what are you doing? And what's your reading, your vision here?
Yes. Yes, you remember, Rowan, you and I traveled together to Brazil.
I was just thinking of Brazil.
Were you?
Yes.
And I remember there was a moment when we visited the homeless. Yes. And I think I remember that I was actually quite moved at their sense of solidarity with each other, and I found myself in a position where they were comforting me, rather than me comforting them. And just because they were struggling financially, or they came from poor backgrounds, or they came from massive hardship, and God knows that a lot of people in developing countries, especially, and I think I would probably say Black people particularly, have known struggle. You know, they really, they have struggled and they continue to struggle, but they still emerge resilient, and they still understand that love and solidarity that makes us human and reach out to one another, even, amid massive, extreme poverty, and this is something for me that I believe, I look at the world in that way, because of my mother and my grandparents, and I think part of me has probably really written this book to honor her, to honor my mother. I wish she could be listening right now. I don't know if she has managed to join, but because she embodies that solidarity, that love, that resilience, that compassion, that we're looking at. And I think as young people growing up, you learn that from the home. And when you go out in the world, I'm privileged that I work for an organization like Christian Aid, where people that surround me are people who, by and large, believe in the same things around solidarity, justice, and dignity.
You've worked for more than one international body, and I wonder what reflections you've got about the relative significance and the relative feel of working, if you like, on the front line locally and working on this large global scale, whether it's the UN or an NGO or whatever. The contrasts, the pluses and minuses of those two contexts.
Oh, wow. I think I've worked locally, both in Zambia and here in the UK, very, very different experiences. So I remember that in the 90s, I think late 90s, I went back to Zambia after doing my master's degree at Warwick. And I was working on a program, I think it was the UNFPA Fourth Country Support Program to Zambia on gender, population and development. And at the time, we were still seeing very much the ravages of HIV and AIDS. And, we had quite a lot of child-headed households. And I remember going to the western province of Zambia. And what you see is the lived realities of people. You see them as human beings, and you see them that in a way they're not waiting for help to come from anywhere. They are really trying to use whatever resources are around them to make life better for themselves, against the odds. And I've seen that as I've worked, especially for Christian Aid, whether you go to Ethiopia, you go to Bangladesh, yes, the people are in dire straits. People are displaced, they're ignored, they're stateless. But one thing that I have learned on this sort of journey is that no matter how we look at them, let us just remember that they're doing everything that they can. And many times we don't even count their own resources. We don't value them what they put. But if we actually did, if we counted, if we quantified, if we valued what they put in, we would realize that it's probably much more than any aid brings in. I think the other sort of interesting thing, Rowan, is I worked, when I came here to the UK, I think you've heard me tell the story that I couldn't get a job, and so I worked as a care worker. I trained as an auxiliary nurse. And I remember my mother coming to visit, and she shook her head and, said, why don't you come home? And I said I would pray about it. And if I didn't get a different job that goes with my training, in the next sort of 6 to 12 months, I would pack my bags and go home. And of course, I did get something. But I remember being shocked at the relative poverty of the Black community in the Midlands, in Coventry. And the young people that I was working with at the time, very little aspirations, no hope of achieving. And we were in the first world, the so-called first world. And at the same time, I have worked at very senior, very high level on policy issues. So to answer your question, I think that what you see is that for us to really make change, we need to connect the policy level, or rather the global level, to the local level, and vice versa. But the other thing that I've noticed is, and it doesn't matter whether it's the UN, for example, the UN has got so many people from different countries, from different ethnic groups, speaking different languages, but the discrimination still very much exists within that environment. Right? So you can be from different countries, different places, and yet evidence of Black people being left behind, even within that large bureaucracy, is very much there. And the same with all our organizations. And you can ask the question: are we a mirror of the society that we're in? And maybe the answer is yes, we are. But my question is, should we be different? And if the answer to that is yes, then I think we've got some work to do to get to a place where we're not a mirror of society, but we are a place that society can look up to and strive to be better.
Yeah. Yes, I think this is crucial. But just before coming back to this question of power and imbalance, what you made me think of there was the title of that book by Gustavo Gutierrez, the Latin American liberation theologian, a book called We Drink from Our Own Wells, which was essentially about the need to understand that we're not bringing the nourishment from outside, that somehow people have resources. At best, what we can hope for is that we will somehow be part of their action, their discovery of the resources that are there, rather than that we are just providing what they haven't got. And that's a key thing. But the power question and the way in which we do and don't mirror society, I mean, we're all really, really called to judgment on this, particularly in the events of the last couple of months with the Black Lives Matter. But suddenly, and it has been quite suddenly giving this an urgency which for some reason it hasn't had for quite a long time. And it seems that every institution, every community is now being challenged quite substantially to say, well, for all the fine words and all the policies, is it working? And the answer seems to be, on the whole, no. And we're all of us looking at what we can do, and we're all of us, I think, perhaps tempted to rush into cosmetic actions that'll make it feel better. But what we need to do is a lot of listening, a lot of learning. And
can I ask you a personal question, if I may? You don't have to answer, of course, but I think the George Floyd, it was almost like a watershed. You know, it was a moment in our time, in our history, that everybody who's alive this time, this generation, will probably remember, or at least they should remember, and maybe we should say they must remember. And there are times, Rowan, where I personally struggle with why does this continue to happen, right? I just don't understand it, because even after George Floyd, there's been more and more and more. And, when does it stop? When does it stop? So I would be interested in what are some of your own personal thoughts around this?
It's a big question, but I'll go back a bit in a way and say, when I was a teenager, of course, part of my visual world, looking at the news back in 1964, 65, the beginnings of the civil rights movement in the United States, and beginning to get some glimpse of a change, a necessary change. I remember very vividly the news of the assassination of Martin Luther King and the shock that sent around. And in recent months, one of the hardest things has been thinking, a lot of people of my generation thought that some of these things had been faced and dealt with, and they haven't. And it's a sort of Groundhog Day feeling, we're back to that position. At the same time, that's of course projecting it outwards and not looking at my own practice and my own understanding, and having to say, as I think you have to say as a Christian, well, this is your problem too, this is my problem too. If it hasn't bedded in, if it hasn't become natural and clear and obvious that we act justly since the 1960s, what exactly have I been doing for the last 50 years? And that's a hard question. I think part of what people may be apprehensive about is that very often when issues about race are raised, people like me, people with lots of white privilege, think, oh, I'm about to be made to feel guilty. And I really don't want to be made to feel guilty. So let's try and push this away for now, or pretend it's all right. And I think that knee-jerk, not wanting to be made to feel guilty, is part of the denial that goes on. And the liberating moment is when you realize this isn't about whether you feel bad or good. This is about the way things work, and the way things have worked, and the possibility of changing them. We have different levels of complicity, different levels of responsibility, but let's not get into the business of either denying the guilt or just piling it on and thinking that'll make it better.
Yeah.
I remember so vividly a conference many years ago on global poverty in the churches, and it was all very earnest and very well-meaning. And in the final plenary, somebody got up and said, I think the good news for the poor is not the message that the rich feel awful about it. And I think the same could be said in race terms. The good news for the non-white communities is not that white people feel bad about it, but that something is being done about it, that some change is possible.
Yes. No, I mean, certainly it's, I think, I'm sure there must be many people out there, if like me, you go from being really frustrated, as very sad and maybe sometimes discouraged at the fact that these things continue to happen, to a place of hope where you think, well, I'm here now, I'm taking a space. And this is something that I tell myself as a leader, as a person, that I'm taking a space and I better make that space count, so that hopefully things can be better for those that are coming behind. And again, you see it in different communities. You see that othering, the insider, outsider, whether it's between the Dalits communities in India who are being outsiders insiders, even when we're dealing with things like public health pandemics, right? Whether it's ethnic groups that are considered lower than others, different social groups. But like I said to a colleague recently from another organization, I think we were actually at a meeting of chief executives, I said, you see, the difference is that for me, in this country, when I get on a train and I get to London, I don't have to say anything, right? You just have to look at me, and just on the basis of the color of my skin, you have judged me, you have condemned me, and you have relegated me to something and not someone. And so, you know, part, I think, of this conversation around power, around fear, around identity, for me, telling this story was about saying to whoever reads it, it doesn't matter at what level and where along the chain, our stories are important, they're valuable, and there isn't a hierarchy of importance in terms of our stories. And part of me really just wants to, I hope that others can tell their stories, you know, more and more. Yeah.
I think that's a big part of the importance of this. This is a wonderful book. It's not just about Amanda. It's about the doors that are opened by the fact that you tell that story in the way you do. And I think that is what will be lastingly important about the book, frankly. Mm-hmm. But I think perhaps before we open this up to the questions coming in from our guests, I wonder if I can just stick with this issue of power just a little bit longer and think about the way in which, not only in the church, but in NGOs, in the practice of international aid, the power element is very often the thing that people don't notice. I know you've talked about this from time to time in talks I've heard you give, and you've always reminded us, I think, that it's no good talking about the aid or development agenda without naming and examining with all the intelligence we can muster that not so deeply buried agenda about power that goes with it. And as we see shifts in the culture of international aid in Western governments like our own, we do need to be alert, don't we, to that covert agenda, that there are issues here about what kind of power is involved and what power is being sought.
Yes. At so many levels, I mean, so many layers. It's a bit like an onion, isn't it? I think you have in the sort of the political space, you have. I think you still have governments such as ours, or in the US or other Western European governments, or indeed. China, the ones that are more affluent, have got more resources. They want to maintain that power that they have over the best resources in the world. It is about getting the best for yourself. And I think what we are not doing a lot of is to analyze at what cost. And the fact that actually the cost is no longer acceptable for the millions of people. So whether it leaves people in extreme poverty, or whether it perpetuates conflict in other parts of the world, or whether it exploits natural resources that we have, cuts down the trees, leaves us, completely barren in terms of a thriving ecosystem of human beings and nature, right? That power needs to be checked. I was listening to a preacher recently, I just can't remember which one it was, and he said, unless power is used to liberate the oppressed, to alleviate the suffering of millions of people, it will eventually corrupt. Right? So it's not just that power corrupts. It's when we are given power as individuals, we need, if we use it for ourselves and to make ourselves bigger, then that power will eventually destroy us. The power that is positive is power that multiplies, power that reaches out to others, the power that stands in solidarity, that and I think those are some of the things that I like to talk about and I would like to see. And then I think the question, especially when I look at our sector and NGOs working in the sector, is many colleagues, I think, that are aware of this power. I don't think they're blind to it. I think they're aware of this power. And I think perhaps the frustration, and I'm speaking on behalf of people who I haven't consulted, but I suspect that the challenge is, if we're working within a system, an economic system, or a system of power that is rotten to the core, how do we begin to change it? In a tangible way. And I know we immediately rush to, okay, we need to help people with some resources, we need to do this, but we are still asking those people to work within a capitalist system. And that system itself is a system that protects the few, the power and the rich over the millions. So, but surely we have enough intellectual economists around the world to suggest to us and recommend a way that is different. And I think if there's one thing that COVID has done, is it has forced us to take a step back, just to stop and reflect. And I think if we miss this opportunity to really think through the decisions and the choices that we make as individuals, but as governments across the world, as multilaterals, whether it's the United Nations, the World Bank, IMF, if we miss this opportunity, Rowan, I seriously think that, we will be that generation that lost. We will be the generation that lost.
I think it's really important to conclude this conversation with that recognition of the essential destructiveness of unjust power, and the way in which, as we were saying earlier, that kind of power cannot coexist with solidarity and compassion. Now we're in a world where it's more visible than ever in some ways that we are bound up with one another. We can't write off or ignore the cost to others, because it will be a cost to everyone, a cost to the globe itself. And whatever else has happened in the last few months, I think that has begun to land in some people's minds. But there is a hill to climb, and I think you're absolutely right. It's an opportunity which we really must struggle not to lose. And I very much hope that Christian Aid as a whole, your book, and the witness and the advocacy of all of us will just keep that opportunity firmly in the mind of the society we're part of and the governments that we speak with. Well, I'm aware we've had our time for conversation, and Amanda, thank you so much for everything, for the wonderful book, for the insights that you've shared with us. I'll hand back to Dion now to introduce the Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Rowan. Can I just embarrass you a little bit and just say it has been an amazing experience for me working with you. It's not just a job that I have, and I wish that others could have had the opportunity to work with you, and I am blessed for it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, both of you. We have been listening to a fascinating conversation, and one that gives us much reason to reflect, and I suspect, like me, within this audience, I can see that we've got 115 people on the call, would probably be nodding their heads to a number of things in which they've heard and resonated with. And so we're going to open up with some questions to kickstart that. Some of the phrases and some of the signposting that we just heard, kind of oscillated around, themes of dignity and justice, assumption and labels, listening and learning together. I heard that, policy failure and legacies and brokenness. But in the midst of that, we heard about hope and faith, resetting and rebooting. We can do things differently. Despite the barriers of language and perceptions, and are they really, barriers that there's an argument to maintain? Power and privilege, and certainly a phrase that I'm familiar with is, your future is bound up with mine. Just to expect that somehow we are not interrelated is just not true. And all of that in the context of creation, and the trees know my name for me is hugely fascinating. But let me turn to some of the questions here and pick up a few. So I'm starting with Garish, who posted the first question, and maybe I'll take these in twos, Amanda, so that it will help us with the next 20-25 minutes or so. The question here is, how have your roots influenced who you are today, what you believe in and what your values are? And I think, you started to touch on some of that within the storytelling, but might be good just to dive in a bit deeper on that. And just pick up a question from Harriet. Are there any topics that you didn't include in the book? So let's just kick off with those.
Okay, thank you. I think for that first question, I'm sure both Rowan and I can answer from different perspectives. But for me, Girish, in terms of have my roots influenced who I am today, absolutely, absolutely, so much. I think sometimes when you, especially when you come to live in European countries, sometimes I think that people think you've come from a place that has got no values, a place that has no compassion, a place where somehow Africans are these things, these aggressive of people. And maybe I am caricaturing a bit too much, but I think part of me telling this story is about saying, I learned the values in my mother's home. I learned hardworking from my grandparents and from my mother. I learned how to forgive from them. I learned how to be human from there. I learned how to work with others from other ethnic groups in Zambia. It's a lot of those things that now make me who I am have come over a period of time. And I think, but what is important for me is that I didn't stop learning when I left home, right? I believe that I've continued learning. And living here in the UK, I have learned things from other people of African descent, but I've also learned something from people who I consider indigenous to England, or rather people who've been here maybe 3, 4, 5 generations. So I think you just have to continue learning. And I think what I'm looking for is in the same way that I'm prepared to continue learning from others, I would like them to also take time to learn from me and from my heritage, because I have something that I bring to the table of learning. I think, and in fact, I think there was something else around the title of the book, and partly that title questions my who I am, and in a way that's why I picked it. So it's intertwined with the where I'm coming from, so that when you ask me where are you, I mean where are you from, I think Rowan and I remember, I think we chatted a bit about this, that it might appear like you're just saying, so where are you from? And if I say I'm from Coventry, and you say no, you're not from Coventry, where are you really from? Then you question who I am as an individual, and whether I can make, you question my integrity, you exclude me, you put me away from you. And I think that's part of my story. So Dion, I'm sure that I didn't answer the second question. Actually, I've probably forgotten it, but remind me. You're on mute.
Sorry. So let me go back to that question. Are there any topics that you didn't include in the book?
Yes. There are, I suspect there are a whole zillion topics that I didn't include in the book. Some things I didn't talk about because they're not purely my story to tell. And some things I thought, you know what? Yeah, let me leave some. Let me leave some to myself for now. Who knows? Maybe in the future, I might want to tell those stories. But you don't work in international development for over 25 years and not have multiple stories to tell. I think there are many stories that still need to be told, and that people need to hear. So, Rowan, I don't know if you wanted to touch on that. Have your roots influenced who you are today?
Well, just very briefly, I think I've already indicated that the Welsh roots continue to be important simply because of that sense of difference being around, different perspectives. And also growing up in what I suppose was one of the last phases of the old style South Welsh community life, with lots and lots of extended family and open doors. When we went back to my parents' village at weekends, which we often did, of course we walked into the house without knocking. And something about that vision has stuck, I have to say.
Yeah, no, thanks. Dion, do you have more questions?
Sure, yes. So picking up a couple of questions from the Q&A box. From Miriam, obviously she sends congratulations and who's inspired just to participate, but it's saying generally, you know, she has been doing writings over many years, all in her notebook, and I suspect both of you can resonate with that. But how do you, what advice do you have to aspiring writers to complete their story and their visions?
I think I'll keep that one very brief. Like I said at the beginning, I wrote my story because I mean, the person who encouraged me to just write was Mbozi, the one, my friend who's just read the chapter. When I say to her, listen, I talked her through the things that were going through my head. And she just said to me, you know what, Amanda, just write. Just sit on your laptop and write. And that's what I did. So what I would encourage you, Miriam, is, you know what, your story is worthy of being heard. It's worth telling. So tell it.
And to Rowan.
I think the only thing I'd want to add is, if you're writing your own story, it can help sometimes to think of it, not literally, but in some sense, as a letter to someone you trust and want to share with. Think of someone you would want to tell this to, and write to them.
Wonderful, thank you. So picking up another one from the Q&A box from Bob 5. Where do you most feel at home, and what do you most long for?
Bob, that's like saying to a visitor to Nigeria or Ghana or Senegal or Sierra Leone, you know, which jollof rice do you prefer? You get into trouble. But I feel at home, I think both here in the UK and in Zambia. And I'll explain myself, because I think there's a difference in that feeling of at home. I think when I go to Zambia, I just, right from the time when I land at the airport, I feel that nobody's going to judge me by the way I look, by the color of my skin. That's number one. I know exactly what I'm doing. I know my bearings, not just geographical bearings, but I am me. And I'm just one of several millions of people that live in Zambia. You know, there is no baggage of having to second guess myself within that environment. And then, of course, that's where my mother is. So I can walk barefoot there, you know. I can eat all my favorite foods that I haven't sometimes eaten in a while. And it's a different kind of home that I feel. I'm very comfortable, very confident in that space. England is my second home. And again, when I travel and I land, especially when I land at Heathrow, I just feel like, yes, I'm home. But it's a home that I second guess myself many times. You know, I have to think, if I speak like this, are people going to think, oh, look at this Black woman, she's being aggressive. If I do this, are people going to judge me all the time by the color of my skin? And it's, I think it's challenging. It's challenging. But it is also a place that has given me sanctuary at a time when I migrated. Despite the fact that I've had some tough days here, I've also made some good friends. I've made some good links, and I have grown into myself as the person that I am. So going back to my story earlier on, I have picked up pieces of knowledge in this country that I now also call home, that are very important. So I feel at home in both spaces. And I think I would like to believe that for future generations, there'll be more people like me, people who don't come just from one space, but have come from an amalgamation of different heritage, living in different places. And I think that we don't have to choose which one is more home. I think it's perfectly in order to say I feel at home in several different places. Hope that answers your question.
Okay. Moving on to a set of questions that really pick up the dynamic and tension between power and religion or religious institutions. And so a question for either Amanda or really Rowan to reflect a little more on when that power seems to collude, or how and when it stands with people, the poor. So much of what you spoke about earlier, Amanda. Wonder if either of you could reflect just on that dynamic of power and institutionalized religion, specifically is the word being used. Any thoughts and reflections?
Rowan, do you want to go first?
I think that might illustrate institutional power. So perhaps it might be sensible for a white clergyman to shut up and listen at this point.
I don't know, Dion. I think we talked quite a bit about that in our conversation with Rowan. I think that where the religious well, I guess I'm going back to my separation between faith and religious institutions. because I think I still believe very much that there is nothing wrong with faith, and in a way, there is nothing wrong with religion. I think it is the interpretation and the practice of, or malpractice of what we've heard that becomes problematic. And it's when that faith is institutionalized into a center of power that it becomes a problem. You know, I was reflecting, I think, recently that, you know, in our church, as you know, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, and in our churches back home, back in Zambia, what you find is that we were always told that you couldn't play like African drums in church because those were not, they were not okay. The only thing that you could use in terms of instruments at the time was the piano. And you ask yourself, okay, so who makes the piano, right? And if you are a church in rural Zambia somewhere, you know, where are you going to get the money to buy a piano, right? And what is, I mean, it just happens that the piano is represents a particular culture and a particular tradition, right? And so who says that that tradition is the right tradition as opposed to the, you know, the little drums that that people play in churches? And it's a small illustration of how power gets misused by centralized institutions to actually oppress people's identity and therefore take away their power. Because power is not, it's made up of so many different things in the individual, you know, the things that we know, the things that are you know, are close to us. If you take away everything that I believe in and tell me that they're all wrong, then you leave me wandering on the seas or oceans of life, and I have nothing to hold on to except that which you give me, right? And because it's not something that is mine, I'm perpetually trying to reinvent myself so that I can be more like you, right? And I think sometimes that's what really the power that is centralized within religious institutions has done. It has told us that somehow the things that we believe in are not, they're evil, right? So when we go, when African ethnic groups go to worship their ancestors or to remember their ancestors, it is evil, right? But when we go to church here, let's say in London, to go on All Souls Day to go and pray for the for those that have gone, it is okay. It's acceptable. Why? Why that difference? Right? That is the type of what I see as a power that is so subtle but insidious, and that it's at the core of who you are and leaves you mentally enslaved because you start to believe those untruths, right? And we have to free ourselves from that. So I don't know if that even comes close to answer the question, but that is, I think where we are now, I think religious institutions need to just stop, acknowledge what has gone wrong, and restore. They have to go through, have a conversation, and then go through a process of restoration, right? A restoration not just in terms of monetary terms, but a restoration of dignity and of love, and a restoration and a reclaiming of what true faith is, as the light that is going to guide us. And for Christians, I think that we need to go back to the true message of Jesus Christ. You know, what did he stand for? What did he come for? What did he say to us? What does the resurrection mean? What does the sacrifice on the cross mean? I think those are deep questions that we need to ask. And how do we manifest that? right? So I think we need to change. Dion?
I mean, that was a really big question, so I think we could have a webinar on that all by itself. So let's find a date for that one. Time is running, so I'm going to try and wrap up with the last 3 questions. A question coming in from Christine Allen to Amanda. What piece of scripture speaks to you the most at this moment? What piece of scripture speaks most to you at the moment in this journey, and why?
I think it had for those who have gone to church with me for many years in this country. I always go back to Jeremiah 29 verse 11. For I know the plans that I have for you, says the Lord. And when you read that scripture in its fullness, it takes me back to a point where I know that I define myself by God who has created me, and He has created me in His image. And I tell myself that they would have only been me, and still Christ would have gone to the cross for me. That's how valuable I am to Him. And the plans that He has for me as an individual are not plans to harm me, but plans to, to help me, plans to give me an unexpected end. And because of that, I then try very much to connect with God in trying to be the best version of myself. And to just always try and ask myself, Christine, that, what does God want me to do? Because I was created for His pleasure, for His purpose, and so how can I be that person that draws closer and closer to Him? And I can tell you this, I'm a work in progress. I'm certainly a work in progress. I see there's also a question from Toily there.
Yes, so 2 quick questions here. One is ask you about the writing process. How was it and what surprised you? And the last question, if you were to write a sequel in 10 years' time, how would you like it to be different and the same?
Let me start with the writing process. I think like Alexandra said right from the beginning, I think the publishing process has been surreal. I think the writing process has also been surreal. Like I said, that I've been writing different things, different stories over the past 15 years, half finished, and so on, and they're sitting somewhere in the house. But over the summer, last summer in August, we didn't go anywhere as a family. We stayed home. We decided we're going to stay at home. And after a week, I think I took 3 weeks off. After about a week of being at home, I was getting bored. And I had been talking to Mbozi about the stories of my grandparents. And she said, why don't you write? And I sat down, and I'm telling you, for 2 solid weeks, I woke up in the morning, sat at my desk, or the table, dining table actually, and just wrote. And I just put everything that I wanted to say. And the reason I think I found it easier to write was because it was almost therapy. It was not a chore. It was a labor of love. I really liked remembering the stories from my grandparents. I would pick up my phone and call my mom and say, oh, can you just remind me again? Remember when this happened, what was it? And then we'd talk about it. So it was remembering things from my childhood that I found really impactful. So that was the process. If I was to write another book, I don't know how that process would be. But one thing I do know is that I think I write the book in my head first. And then when I start typing it down, it's just a question of putting my words on paper. Toily's question, if I were to write a sequel in 10 years, I don't know, but I suspect that I would want to be asking questions like, how far have we come in 10 years? You know, how far have we come? And I think it would definitely be different. It wouldn't be the same, because I'm on a journey of learning, of picking up knowledge and maturing. And as I mature, as I learn, and hopefully as I see changes in our own society and in the lives of people around me and in different countries, as I see more miracles with in answered prayer and all sorts of different things, I'm hoping that I would be able to write a book with a different tone, but also that hopefully shows that as a world, we've moved on. But all that is God willing. All that is God willing.
It's been fascinating to speak and listen to you both in this conversation this evening. You know, I want to say we have been truly blessed. So as we wrap up in the last 3 minutes, I wonder, Amanda, if you have any closing remarks you'd like to make, and also extend that invitation to Dr. Williams.
Rowan, do you want to go first?
Thank you. I think you should have the last word. I think I'd just say thanks again for the book. It's not a comfortable read, and it shouldn't be. And the issues that have come up about power and so forth, you know, I, as somebody who's been in positions of institutional power, obviously I have to look at my record. I have to examine what I got wrong in this and in many areas, and that's a positive thing, which I want to welcome, because it is, as I say, about learning from one another, learning from the challenges, learning from the difficulties, and not trying to bury them. But that's made possible when there is that underlying sense of loving solidarity, the sense that we are all precious in the sight of our Maker and Redeemer. And that therefore, if there are challenges, if there are difficulties, it is for our life, not for our death. And your quote from Jeremiah, of course, is about that. You know the plans I have for you, plans for life and not for not for loss. Mm-hmm. So it's a good text to bear in mind as we go from this, I think.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Rowan. I think, Dion, what I would want to say is, first of all, I just want to say thank you to everybody who has supported me on this journey. Everybody that is attending this event, this launch, thank you for taking time out of your schedules just to sit and listen to me and Rowan speak and talk. And I hope that when you read this book, if you do get to read it, I hope that there will be something for each one of you. I think there will be things that you disagree with. There will be things that are difficult for you to read and take in. I hope that there will also be things that you agree with, and things that you say that say to you, yes, actually, I can do something here, and ultimately, I hope that they encourage you to be able to. The book encourages you to be able to tell your own story and to reaffirm who you are and that your story is important. It's important for all of us to hear it. It's important for you to tell it. I think that I would also want to say that in a very special way, I think my mom, I think I mentioned her at the beginning, and I want to end with mentioning her. And many mothers like her has been an extraordinary influence in my life, you know. And I thank her for selflessly sharing with me what she knows, sharing with me the stories of her parents, imparting in me some of her knowledge, and allowing me to flourish as an individual thinker, different from her, but united in solidarity in a shared connection. So thank you. I think that's all I can say. That remember just my universal truth. There is more that we share across the world with each other as human beings than what makes us different.
Thank you. Thank you. It's just left for me then to say thank you to Dr. Williams for being with us this evening. Thank you, Amanda, for sharing your story with us, your truth, your insight, and trusting us with your story. For those, the 91 people still in the room, thank you for giving up your evening, your Thursday evening. It's been a delight to have you with us. Make sure you get the book. It's available, so you should have seen earlier in the presentation that this is available from the publisher, but there is an exclusive price if you use a particular code. So you've seen this, I'm just repeating, the code is but where to, as the number 2, but where to. So you can go to the publisher's website and use that code. Thank you again for your time and energy this evening. God bless you. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dion.
Buy the book. Buy the book.
Thank you so much.